Before we begin, one short editorial note. This being the first episode of our second season, we decided to try something a little different. For our longtime listeners who are familiar with our Polish Saint of the Month segment, we decided to try including this piece in our show in a separately released episode on its own each month. We had heard some feedback that our podcasts were getting a little long, and even though they were very interesting topics, the fear was that this important segment may be getting lost in trying the attention span of our listeners. With it now being released as a separate piece, this allows you to enjoy this segment on its own, or right after the main episode at your leisure. The thought was also that you can take it and listen during your prayer time, which you would probably not do, usually given the nature of some of our topics and interviews. So, going forward, look for a Polish Saint of the Month, listed as episode 1.1 starting this month, and afterwards, they will be numbered 2.1, 3.1, etc. This is a trial run, and please do let us know by dropping us a line at pierogideprayer@gmail.com or message us on our socials what you think of the change. As always, dziękujemy, and thanks for listening. Cześć, hello, witam, and welcome to Pierogi to Prayer, the official podcast of St. Joseph's Polish Apostolate of the Diocese of Camden, coming to you from our historic home at 1010 Liberty Street in Camden, New Jersey, the heart of South Jersey's Polonia for over 130 years. I am your host, Michael Matalevich. Each year in late October, as the cold weather begins to edge ever closer, there is a festive atmosphere that plays out here in the United States as the major holidays of our culture begin descending in rapid succession. The seasonal gates open with Halloween on October 31st, leading less than a month later into Thanksgiving, and of course then on to Christmas, the uncrowned king of American holidays. Yet were to be in Poland during early November, the atmosphere is quite different. In the Catholic Church calendar, November the 1st and 2nd commemorate the complementary feasts of All Saints and All Souls respectively, with the entire month traditionally dedicated to the memory of all the faithful departed. In Poland, these days are official national holidays, and during them there is a massive migration all over the country as Poles return to their ancestral hometowns to clean the graves of and otherwise honor their deceased family members and friends. Roadways to cemeteries are often crowded in the days leading up to November the 1st, as tombstones are diligently scrubbed and cleaned. Solemn processions and memorial masses take place in specially prepared cemetery chapels on the days themselves, as relatives say prayers for the souls of the deceased in a public display of their Catholic tradition and faith. Perhaps the most distinctive feature of all these celebrations, however, is the placing and lighting of candles in the snitch, translated to the word lantern, at the graves of their beloved. At night, these colored glass containers, which come in all shapes and sizes, cover cemeteries in a breathtakingly magical glow that illuminates the darkest of rural towns and villages. The ancient significance of these lights is that they enable the souls of the departed to find their way back to earth in order to visit with their relatives and bestow blessings and intercessions. While relatives' graves and monuments are covered in these lanterns, it is also a touching practice that if someone were to see any grave which has been neglected or unvisited, that you place a snitch on there as well, so that no one is forgotten on this day. This strong sense of duty to the graves of ancestors, while a living embodiment of the Christian corporal work of mercy to do so, in fact, has its roots in a pagan Slavic celebration of Jade, translated to Ancestors' Night or Forefathers' Night, and it reflects a centuries-old value on the part of Poles that reaches back to the ancient days before the Christianization of the country. The honoring of ancestors in this way may seem an alien concept to most people in the United States, where apart from flowers or other mementos, many cemeteries go unadorned, as the attitudes towards death and memory have in some ways arguably become sanitized and even made the subject of novelty. The popularity of cremation in the United States has led to some, shall we say, creative ways of disposal of remains. Anything from a respectful scattering over a favorite spot of the deceased, to incorporation into some sort of monument with cement, or even so I've heard, being shot out of a cannon. The church, however, still maintains that respectful interment in a dedicated cemetery is the preferred method for all human remains, regardless of cremation status, so that the memory of all people may be honored and remembered. This introduction of ancestry and seasonal cemetery visits is a segue into the topic of our episode today. Genealogists are people who spend most of their time among the dead in one form or another. Yet if you speak with any of them, they will usually explain that the pursuit of the subject has as much to do with the living as it does with the deceased. Our guest today, Julie Szczepankiewicz, is, among other things, a seasoned genealogical research expert. As you will soon hear, her impressive resume and knowledge helps to serve as an introduction for any of our listeners who wish to explore this rewarding field of personal research and discovery. Yet perhaps some of the other elements of our discussion will hopefully also leave you with some greater sense of the importance of our heritage and traditions that is at the heart of not only our apostles' mission, but that of every person of Polish descent.
So good morning. Thank you so much for being on Pierogi to Prayer. We're so very delighted to have you.
Thank you, Michael. Very happy to be here.
Maybe just start out by giving a little bit of an introduction about yourself, kind of basic facts, where you're from, where you're joining us from today. You can start with that even. We can kind of go from there.
Okay. So I'm a native of Buffalo, New York. My husband and I both grew up there, and then we left to go to grad school in 1990, and we haven't made it back, although we still have extended family in Buffalo, and we still go back. I mean, we go back to visit a number of times per year, but we currently live in the New England area, in Hopkinton, Massachusetts, which is probably best known as the starting point for the Boston Marathon. I am currently serving as president of the Polish Genealogical Society of New York State, which is based in Buffalo. Previously, I have served as the secretary of the Polish Genealogical Society of Massachusetts. Prior to Zoom meetings with COVID, it was sort of a bloom where you're planted because I couldn't readily make it back to Genealogy Society meetings in Western New York. So I decided to get active in the Polish community here in Massachusetts, where I'm living. And I also have served as the vice president of the New England Regional Genealogical Consortium. So, I tried to, to give back to the community because typically the genealogy community I found is very generous with their time. So I like to pay it back.
Oh, that's great. A wonderful resume to have. And it's also just a wonderful experience I'm sure that you've had delving into all these different family histories in these different areas of kind of Polish diaspora. Mm-hmm. So how did you first get into genealogy?
I guess it goes back to probably the early 19, after my husband and I got married. I kind of wanted to know more about the family history. My aunt on my dad's side was very into genealogy as well. So she was actively researching all my dad's family, which is not the Polish side. That's, there's sort of a mix of German, English, Irish, Scottish, the usual American colonial kind of mix. But my mom's family was Polish and my husband's family was entirely Polish. So I figured, well, I'll dive into the fresh territory and I'll let Aunt Carol work on dad's side and I'll start on my mom's side. So that gave me a lot of scope for practice with Polish genealogy because, as I said, my husband's family is Polish on both sides. And with my mom's family, it's, it was kind of sink or swim. So I had to kind of learn as I went. My aunt was able to sort of give me some grounding and good basic practices. And she was also helpful because she still lives in Western New York. And so she was able to do some lookups for me, like in the records in the Buffalo City Hall and so forth. And I remember the day that she found the marriage record for my great-grandparents, Jan Zarzicki and Veronica Grzeszak. And I had that document in my hands, and I was looking at the names of my great-grandparents, which were not known to anyone else in the family at that point. And I was amazed. I was hooked. I wanted to learn more. So that was kind of what did it.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Everyone I've ever talked to about genealogy, whether it's Polish genealogy or others, there are these moments of discovery when you see something like that, like a name that was never known before by anyone. And ultimately it's like you start to find out more information that even your grandparents knew about your ancestors. And it's almost, it gets so exciting, and then you see the name and you actually see it, their handwriting, and there's just this thrill that you get out of it. I mean, it's really indescribable to anyone who hasn't done it.
It's absolutely addictive. And discovering not only the names, but the stories of our ancestors. Discovering, that my great grandmother, we knew about her siblings who came to Buffalo. We never knew she had two siblings who stayed in Poland and had families there. You know how hard that must have been for her, leaving them behind. And the way families were separated across time and place. We have another branch of my family. My great grandmother had a sister who returned to Poland, and they thought it was going to be temporary. They thought they were just going to kind of go help out their ailing parents with the family farm kind of thing. And then wars intervened, and they left two of their daughters in Buffalo as teenagers, and they never saw them again. And it was never the intention, but wars, and then communism came to Poland, and travel was difficult, and it just families got separated. So genealogy, in some ways, is all about reconnecting families across time and place.
I don't know if you come across this as well, but what I noticed is we had this kind of narrative, ones that you get when you're in school, even the sort of immigrant story, which is everyone came expecting to build this new life because life in the old country was just so unimaginably terrible. And this was kind of where they just came, and it was the land of freedom and hope and prosperity. But there were so many that went back. And there was always this kind of what I've discovered in my own research, and is that they kind of came here. It wasn't really designed to be permanent. It was more of
Mhm.
with the intention of going back, and kind of similar to your story. In my family, we had people who had siblings who had either stayed, or some that came, and some that went back, and some that even went back and forth multiple times. So I think it's really interesting to think about that, because it kind of changes our perspective a little bit, and then kind of how we are still attached to the old. Now, granted, of course, Poland's history is almost more tumultuous than any other country in Europe in a lot of ways, at least its recent history, when you had the two world wars and you had communism. And so there certainly were many motivating factors that kind of push and pull people. But that was something that I don't know if you've experienced that as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, we call them birds of passage. All those people who went back and forth, and they came to America hoping to maybe earn some money and then go back to Poland and have their family, grow and thrive there. And I have discovered lots and lots of those kinds of examples in my family. Actually, my own great grandfather, Joseph Zielinski, came as an immigrant to North Tonawanda, New York in 1912. Married a nice Polish girl, and she had been born in New York State, but her parents were Polish. And when in 1921 word came that his only surviving younger brother in Poland, Władysław, died at the age of 23. And now his mother, who had had 10 children and managed to outlive all of them at this point, except for that son, Joseph, in America, she was kind of, I think, in panic mode at that point, thinking, how's she going to, handle things? So she called her son, Joseph, or sent word to him that his brother had died and could he come back. And I think it was the family story that I've heard was that it was Joseph's intention and his wife's to settle in Poland at that point. And the kicker was, so his wife was planning for this. His American-born wife was sending back all these, home goods to Poland with the intention that they would, be there when she went to set up a household. And she got to Poland, and I guess the story goes that her mother-in-law looked at all this and said, "These things are too fine. We don't need these for everyday use." She donated them to the parish priest. And so when my great grandmother got there, there's like nothing. So that didn't really get the relationship off to a good start. And it ended up that they did not stay in Poland. They lived there about 6 months. And they came back to North Tonawanda, New York, and they left the grandmother in Poland. And she was living with her sister when she passed. And again, you wonder about all the motivations there. Was she just adamant about not leaving her home, or was it really that they just didn't get along? It's so funny when you start to discover these stories, though.
I maybe we can speak to this a little bit. I've always kind of thought of genealogy too as this sort of understanding about more of who we are as people, because it's people don't change, the times and
Mm-hmm.
the places around them change, but when you start looking at these, and you can it's kind of like detective work, genealogy, when you piece together things, and then And then you have like stories like that, and it's, this person didn't get along with this one and all, and it almost, I think, can help clarify things. It was interesting. I just did a podcast the other day, and we touched on this a little bit, talking about this generational trauma thing. And life was so hard for immigrants, particularly who came over in the early 1900s, and working in this industrial settings, and death was common. And my family, they were coal miners, and my great grandfather, he lost his father when he was 4, and there was a disconnect with that. And then, but there was also, you could see kind of this gruffness that kind of came through the generations, and it's almost like you can trace it back to that in some ways, and explain it away, because it is, people struggle with. I remember I had done a genealogical a tree for a friend of mine at work, and he had some problems, and he was an alcoholic, and I started asking about his mother's side, and he said, "Well, my mother hated me." I was like, "Well, that's interesting." And then when I was doing her genealogy, she was orphaned by the time she was 10 because both her parents died from cirrhosis of the liver. So they were alcoholics. And so,
Right.
she kind of projected that onto her son, who she saw going down this path. And it was like, you could see that aha moment when he was like, "Oh, well, maybe that does make sense." And then he saw his mother in a new light. And it was really kind of touching.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's so easy to went to sort of come to. I think we're tempted to come to judgments when we have few facts, or we just are left with a lot of questions. But I sort of feel like as we discover our family history, so much of our family makes more sense. There are just so many examples of that I can think of, and people, I think, were hardened by loss, and times really were pretty hard. And I think there was less of a people didn't also have time, I think, to talk about these things as much. I think my sense is that they were much more guarded. I mean, even just talking about family that they left behind, maybe it was too painful to really get into it. I think we've all heard the stories about, or heard our elderly ancestors say, well, people didn't talk about those things back then. Sometimes just getting basic facts out of our grandparents' generation was challenging because they kept saying, well, people just didn't talk about those things back then. But I definitely agree with your point about genealogy. It can be a really helpful tool in sort of healing generational trauma, and helping us really see our family members in new lights.
You've been doing this for a while, but it seems like now there's been this kind of surge in interest. I mean, you have Ancestry.com, which is just taken off, and you every time around Father's Day, Mother's Day, St. Patrick's Day, you see these advertisements for, learn about take a DNA test and learn more. And then you have shows such as Finding Your Roots or Who Do You Think You Are they're very incredibly popular. I mean, I think Finding Your Roots is in like its 13th season or something. I saw it recently. So I mean, so why do you attribute that to now? I mean, having done this for several decades now, why is it, or does it just appear that way? Is it just a technological thing?
I do think to some extent it's more the appearance of a surge than an actual surge. I mean, when you think about it, Alex Haley wrote his book Roots back in the 1970s, and I think that really sparked an American interest in genealogy. But I feel like it was maybe harder to really research, especially when you're talking about Polish ancestry, in the days before the internet and before the ready access to historical, digitized historical records. I think that really, more than anything, has prompted this huge explosion of interest. Because back in the day, it used to be, even just to find a census record, first you had to figure out the enumeration district, and then you were scrolling through microfilms, and it would take a long time to just get one record. And now we have so much information at our fingertips that it's really easy to very quickly build a high quality, well documented family tree. Not that everyone pays attention to careful documentation, but the opportunity is certainly there. So I really feel like that has really made an impact. And I think it's the problem we have now is that we have to remind people all the time that if you don't find something online, that doesn't mean the document doesn't exist. It's because what's been digitized, I think, is still just the tip of the iceberg relative to what's out there. But people are so accustomed to that easy access now that I think sometimes they give up a little too soon if they can't find something right away.
I think as a society, we're getting addicted to convenience, and that probably does bleed into genealogy. Because I mean, summarily, when I first started, I mean, I was fortunate that most of my ancestors, they all immigrated to the same small mile square town. in upstate Pennsylvania. So I just went through the cemetery, wrote down all the names that I could find that seemed vaguely familiar, took it to my grandfather, and he made the connections. But then going through microfilm at the library, going into city hall records and things like that. It was laborious. It was fun. But that knowledge has, you can build on it now with the accessibility. But I think I really take your point with that, where it can kind of, people might give up too quick because they don't know how difficult it really was, or it could be. But again, how rewarding. I mean, in a lot of records, I've gone to Poland and worked over there, and all, because a lot of that stuff isn't digitized, and it's kind of sitting in some parish or local authority. You said you've kind of researched in different areas. Let's talk about Polish genealogies in specific. So someone who's just getting into their genealogy, they're just kind of discovering their interest in it, and that they find out they're Polish. Maybe they have a Polish sounding last name, maybe they don't, maybe they found one later on. What would be kind of your advice to get started, and what are some of the challenges with that?
I think the biggest thing people need to try to do is build up a solid body of evidence in U.S. records before they try to make the jump into Polish records. We have a number of indexed databases now that do make it pretty easy. Probably the most popular one is the Vital Records Vital Records database called Genealogy, which is produced by the Polskie Towarzystwo Genealogiczne, or the Polish Genealogical Society of Poland. And there are something like close to 40 million indexed birth, marriage, and death records in there. So even if you know nothing about your family, that can, provide a quick solution sometimes. But I still think it's best for people to go the old school way, and work through U.S. records, work through census records and church records and newspaper records and military, and all the hit all the bases, and try to gather as much information as you can about your family, because it will make it easier. As Polish genealogists, not only are we, well, actually, I guess every genealogist really is prone to the surname variants that we commonly see. Surnames were never spelled consistently till I think about the 1930s. And place names often got butchered as well. Things get spelled phonetically. So if you're going to make sense of all the records and be sure you're tracing the right people, you really do need a solid body of evidence. So I would recommend that people, start with the basics, gather those kind of passenger manifests and all the other records I mentioned, and then sit down and kind of analyze where you are. And talk to, we have a number of great Polish genealogical societies in this country. I think it's nice to find one that might be where your ancestors settled, or one that's near you. And we offer all kinds of educational workshops and lectures, and also personal research assistance. So, there's also Facebook groups, which are great for genealogy. That's a wonderful way you can upload scans of records and, get another experienced pair of eyes to tell you how they read that word, So there's a lot of help that's available, especially as a rookie genealogist. It can be really hard to kind of make sense of all the data, but there's again a lot of help that's available from Polish organizations, genealogical societies, and Facebook. So I would definitely encourage people to do that before they try to make the jump into Polish records. But if you were going to use an indexed database like Genealogy or one of the many others, it helps if you at least know an approximate birth year for your immigrant ancestor, their parents' names, which you can again find out from U.S. records typically. Ideally, at least an approximate place of birth, because the more popular a surname is, the more likely you might be, conflating two distinct individuals. There might be more than one Jan Novak, and there will be more than one Jan Novak who's born in 1879, whose parents were, Maciej and Marianna, so you really, the more you know about your family, the less likely you are to attach spurious ancestors to your family tree.
Yeah, it's funny. I that same thing is like, like the John Smith, and it's like, well, yeah, the Jan Kowalski, essentially in the Polish
Right.
world, and I found that a little bit of to make sure you have a knowledge of Polish history in a way, because there's so many people, especially people who came over in the 1900 and around 1900, and it's Poland was not Poland, it was three different imperial jurisdictions. You look on these records, and sometimes it'll just say Russia, or it'll just say Austria, Maybe you'll get Galicia or something. And then, but to understand why that may have been, and also why the name may have changed, because especially in Germany, I mean, there was this real Germification of names and town names and everything like that. So I've found that like even just a rudimentary knowledge of that is something to keep in mind at least.
Absolutely. In fact, I have a genealogy blog called "From Shepherds and Shoemakers," where I started writing about my research findings and my process of discovery. And I have a blog post that I wrote a number of years ago called "Those Infamous Border Changes," which attempts to unpack, and sort of provide a timeline for Polish history as it impacts the records we see for our ancestors. Because you're right. I mean, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth ended in 1795, and then Poland disappeared off the map for 123 years. It was partitioned between Prussia, Russia, and Austria-Hungary, and that didn't change until Poland reemerged as the Second Polish Republic at the end of World War One. So, and I think these are the kinds of historical details that most of us did not learn in our U.S. History classes here, our history classes here in the United States. So it's really confusing to people, and I think also as families have tried to make sense of this information that they didn't quite understand, you get a lot of myths that pop up as a result. One of like I often hear people will say, well, Grandpa was born in 1880, but he must have been born somewhere near the Russian border. Well, there wasn't a border of Poland and Russia in 1880 because Poland didn't exist. So what that usually means is he was born in Russian Poland, in the Russian partition. So I think that it's funny because that blog post about the border changes is the most popular post that gets the most hits on my blog all the time, because I think so many of us are, as we begin our genealogy, we struggle to understand those border changes.
And it's also, and I think on that, where this sense of what Polish is now and what it was then is very different. And the wars, especially World War II, with its rampant ethnic cleansing of Jewish communities and other ethnic communities around Poland, especially the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, was this very cosmopolitan state. And so it's like when people think of what a Pole is, and then it's, oh, well, no, I was actually, my family were Ruthenians, or they were Lithuanian, or part and part. And, I think that kind of can get lost sometimes as well, where it's like, oh, well, they lived in Russia, so they were Russian. Well, no, they were Russian citizens, but they may have been part of these different ethnic groups. But then that also opens up, I think, some discovery or rediscovery a lot of times of these different little ethnic enclaves or ethnic, churches even. And that can really be, this kind of, like I said, this voyage of self-discovery in a sense.
Yes, yeah, I see that a lot. I'm also admin for the Facebook group, the Galicia Family History Group, and in the Galicia area, there were a lot of it was really mixed between Polish-speaking Roman Catholics and Greek Catholics who might have spoken language that was basically sort of a progenitor of Ukrainian. And the Greek Catholics in particular, I think even in the US, there's a lot of confusion over what it means to be Greek Catholic. They think, well, is that like Greek Orthodox? Or I think in the US also sometimes we just call them Ukrainian Catholic churches. So I think there definitely is this sort of rediscovering of heritage and what these traditions mean in my family and what they meant to my immigrant ancestors.
Are there any particular, I mean, you mentioned the one website, are there any particular resources that you found especially valuable in doing your research?
Oh, so many. So I'm also webmaster for the Polish Genealogical Society of New York State, and we have a research links page that I have tried to kind of organize according to topic. There's translation aids, because that's another thing. Because Poland was divided, the records you're going to encounter for Polish genealogy will likely be in either Polish, Latin, Russian, or German. And so you're going to have to find a way to get around that language barrier one way or another, either by paying someone or getting some volunteer assistance. There are, again, Facebook groups that didn't even exist when I started my journey. Like there's a genealogical translations group on Facebook where you can post a copy of a document and get some native speaker or somebody who's, competent to translate that for you. So there are a lot of different, depending on the application. Like I love the family search site for and ancestry for gathering the evidence that leads back to Poland. Their indexed historical records collections are great for gathering that evidence for place of origin, because ultimately, in order to trace back to Poland, you have to know a place of origin. It's all about location. So those are helpful for that. Family search is also, they've got a catalog of unindexed historical records. So for example, my great-grandmother Veronica Grzeszak was from the village of Kowalewo Opactwo in the Poznań area. And so the records aren't indexed. Like you can't type her name into the search box at Family Search and find her birth record. But they have digitized now and originally microfilmed church records from that parish that you can access via the Family Search catalog. And they've got a tremendous collection from places all over Poland. So that's also very helpful. And of course, nowadays, the Polish State Archives site, Szukaj w Archiwach, is a great source for vital records. The Geneteka has a sister site called Scanoteka, where you can access scans of vital records and other kinds of records. I think this is a really exciting time to be doing Polish genealogy, in part because of the ready access to all the fundamental records you need to build a family tree. But now more and more records that kind of flesh out and provide more details are becoming available. We're seeing collections of notarial records and population registers and court records and town records all coming online now. It's really helping to enrich our family history research. So yeah, I think there are a lot of wonderful sites out there, kind of too many to name, but if you wanted to a quick peek, I would go to the website for the Polish Genealogical Society of New York State and check out research links.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll provide links to that in our show notes on our website too, so that people can find that a little bit more easier after they're done listening. But yeah, that's a great overview. And like you said, there's sometimes it's overwhelming, actually, which is why sometimes you want somebody to kind of point you in the proper direction.
Especially when it comes to the regional databases too, because there's a lot of those.
So within all of this experience that you have, are there any particular, I'm sure there are many, but is there any particular interesting or fascinating story that has really resonated with you over the years that you can kind of retell for our listeners and for us to just kind of get a sense of how this Polish genealogical discovery can really manifest itself in such nice ways?
Oh my gosh, yeah, there are really, as you say, there are so many stories. One of, I think, the ones that my husband thinks of as my best story, and I think this is important because he's not a genealogist, but he was really moved by the story of my Uncle Frank Zielinski, who was a brother of my great-grandfather. So he came over to North Tonawanda, New York from Russian Poland, I think in 1907, and was working there for many years. And but he didn't marry and didn't have children. And when World War I came around, he was drafted. So technically, they weren't supposed to draft aliens. If you were an alien, unless you wanted, like some aliens decided they wanted to use it as a fast track to citizenship. But he'd already been in the U.S. long enough that if he wanted citizenship, he could have applied for it. I think he was sort of more in that category we talked about earlier, where he didn't really intend to stay here. But he got drafted, and so he ended up going to fight in World War I. And he was killed in the final days of the war in the Battle of Meuse-Argonne. And he is buried over in France. And what was interesting to me was when I first started my journey back in the days, again, prior to easy access to internet, I knew he was not buried in the U.S. I checked all the local cemeteries in Western New York, and the family recollection was that he was buried abroad. But they had databases, of the American Battle Monuments Commission had a database. At that time, I think part of the problem was you couldn't search it like phonetically or by partial word or whatever. They didn't have as many flexible search options, but I wasn't finding him in the database. So I had to try to figure out what name he was buried under, because it wasn't Frank Zielinski, which was the name I expected him to be buried under. I mean, his name is inscribed on a monument in North Tonawanda. They have a war monument that has his name spelled correctly. So I didn't anticipate trouble finding him when I went to look for him in military records. But it turned out that even though his World War I draft registration had his name spelled correctly, Zielinski, Zielinski. His at some point during his military career, after probably at Camp Upton, his military records got corrupted, and his name was spelled as Zerlinski. So not close enough that I was able in those pre-fuzzy search days to quickly find it, but I was able to eventually figure it out, and I actually contacted the cemetery, the American military cemetery that he's buried at in France, and I said, hey, could we get his grave marker changed to reflect his real name, because it's kind of a shame that this is not who he was. And they very graciously agreed to give him a new monument, and so his marker now states his name. And I was able to discover a really fascinating package of burial records. Most of our World War I military records, you may know, were destroyed in a fire in St. Louis in the 1970s. But the burial records were stored in a different place in the archives, so those have remained. And his burial records packet was an absolute gold mine of information. It contained things like the telegram that they sent to his parents in Poland to tell them their son had died fighting for the U.S. when he wasn't even supposed to be drafted by the U.S. It contained information on how he died. He was shot in the head by a sniper, and it was just really moving. And it also contained correspondence which cleared up the family mystery, because I couldn't understand why my great grandfather wouldn't have had his brother's body brought home. In Polish culture, it's very important to remember the dead and to honor them, especially like at All Saints Day. The Polish cemeteries are just beautifully lit up with candles, and families go and they remember their deceased. And I thought, why would my great grandfather not want to have his brother brought home? Well, it turns out he did. He had actually requested that the War Department send him a letter saying, what do you want us to do with your brother's body? Do you want us to send him home or keep him here? And he said, send him home. But then what happened was, it took them so long that correspondence took place, I think, in 1919, early 1919, right after the war. But it wasn't until 1921 that they finally had Uncle Frank's body ready for shipment. And during that interval, that was the time when that great grandfather went back to Poland, because, as I mentioned earlier, this is the same guy who went back to Poland with his family because his brother had died, and his mother now has the family farm. So they were only in Poland for like a 6-month interval. But during that interval, the War Department wrote to him and said, "Hey, we've got your brother's body ready for shipment. Please confirm that you will receive it, and you have an undertaker who can handle the interment and so forth." And the letter was returned to the War Department marked addressee no longer at this address. He returned to the old country. It was just a little handwritten note from the post office. He returned to the old country, address unknown. So it just was sort of dumb luck, because then the War Department decided, well, fine, we'll keep him in France and we'll bury him here. So, although my great-grandfather ultimately returned to the U.S. just a few months after that, he missed that crucial bit of correspondence. That was, for me, a really poignant story in the family history that I was able to discover through a whole variety of documents.
And it's fascinating, because this is going to be a real-time demonstration of how sharing family stories and communities, Polish genealogical communities, can help each other. Because I have an uncle whose name was Walter Szymański, who was in World War I, who was killed in the closing days of the war, who was buried in Meuse-Argonne, who was buried in France. And his name was properly spelled Szyymans, and it was spelled in military records as Sheman. And I found some records, and this is how stories and things, the story was he won the Medal of Honor. I found a newspaper article, he won the Distinguished Service Cross, and then he was killed a few days later after that, because he was kind of pulled a Sergeant York and killed all these Germans. But then his mother was offered a Gold Star pilgrimage, which is what they did to a lot to come and visit his grave, which he didn't take him up on. And so I want to know where you found those other records, because likewise, I knew that a lot of World War I records had been destroyed, but I'm going to follow up on you with that, because it's just funny how you have these parallel stories in real time, like I said.
What a great connection. Yeah, actually, that was another piece of correspondence that was in that burial records packet, was a letter about the Gold Star Mothers program, which apparently, so was your Szymański relative in the U.S. at the time?
He was, yeah. He was born here. His parents were from Poland.
Oh, okay. So his mother was also in the U.S. when she was offered the Gold Star pilgrimage, because
Yes.
my great great grandmother missed out on that because she was living in Poland, so they didn't give her the Gold Star trip.
Okay.
So I mean, maybe they figured it was already easy for her to, but I don't know how easy it would have been actually for her to get to France. I mean, those Gold Star pilgrimages were kind of amazing. They were escorted and so forth, and expenses paid. So, but it was just as I said, unfortunate that my great great grandmother probably never got to see her oldest son's final resting place.
It's just so funny that that's such a similar story. But yeah, but it was kind of the same thing. I
Yeah.
wondered why she hadn't taken them up on this opportunity because of that connection with, like you said, like Polish honoring the dead. As much as we have accessible now, like you said, with technology and the internet, there's still stuff that, even though I've been doing it for years, when I talk to someone like you, I have another clue to follow, which is just great. I'm just really really happy about that. um,
Yeah,
so
happy I could help.
yeah, no, it's just terrific. It's really great. There are particular ancestors that I've come across in my genealogical searches that I've almost developed a particular kinship with. It was, for me, it was my one great great grandfather who he died tragically in the coal mine, and I found things about him in newspaper articles and all, and then I went to Poland, to the town where he was from, and was walking the same footsteps, and I just had this very powerful feeling, like this, like I said, this kinship with him. Have you had that similar experience as well? Are there any particular ancestors that you've kind of, I don't know, somehow just identified with for a reason that really doesn't make sense?
Yes, and also I when I visited Poland in 2015, I had exactly the same experience you're talking about. It's like you're coming home and you never, to something that's just, your DNA is coming home, and you never really realized you were missing this until you get there. And then you're in those tiny little villages and you're walking those same streets. I had kind of an electric moment that way with an ancestor who I sort of felt that kinship with my great grandmother Veronica Grzeszak Zajicka, and she was from that little village of Kovalevo Opatstvo. My grandmother was Veronica's daughter, and when I was very close to my grandmother, both my grandparents, and I remember sitting at my grandma's little kitchen table and just asking her stories about the family when I was a teenager, and she told me all about her mother's bravery in coming to the U.S. by herself. She was the first to come to the U.S. Before her brothers, even, which I think was very brave of her. She came to come by herself, and and then she sent her money back to Poland so her two brothers and her sister could also come to the U.S. But I asked my grandmother like what she knew about my grandmother's family in Poland, or her mother's family in Poland, my great grandmother, and she said that her mother had lived near the church and she sewed vestments for the priest, and that the family had a grain mill. So when I visited the little village, I was astonished to discover that right there next to the church was the remains of a windmill that might have actually been used for grinding grain. And we were there with a tour guide, and we're all just kind of dumbfounded. I mean, it was this electric moment, like, oh my gosh, this is the story is real, and it was just the proximity, to the rectory and everything, where my great great grandmother would have been sewing the vestments for the priest. I mean, it was just unbelievable. So that was a really a cool moment. But yeah, I definitely have had ancestors. Another one actually is one I'm researching right now, who's my great great grandmother Antonina Nachonjak Zawitska. And I think the fun thing about her is just the process of discovery has been so involved, because her name has been spelled even in Polish records. I think, as Americans, we sometimes think if we can discover the true original spelling, like we're going to get into Polish records and it'll only ever be spelled one way. But what's made it hard was a lot of the databases, you have to at least have the first letter. And then if, it'll like maybe pick up on some phonetic variants. But her name is Nachonjak, but it's also been spelled, so it's spelled with an N, it's spelled with an M, and it's spelled with an R. And then there are continual variations within the word too, so it's just like, it's something that Chonjek, Machonjek, Rachonjek, something, so that's been kind of a challenge. And so, I think the victories that are sweetest are the ones that we have to fight the hardest for.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And that's just and this kind of leads into my next question, but I kind of had this thought as well that a lot had kind of been destroyed in Poland due to the wars. And that myth was shattered when I'm standing next to the 18th century baptismal font in a church that my ancestor was baptized in. Um, so on that, are there any misconceptions or myths that you've kind of come across in your research? Not necessarily as it relates specifically to Polish genealogy, but I mean the big one we always hear about is the name was changed at Ellis Island.
Right.
We know that's patently false. So just are there others that you've kind of come across in that vein?
Well, I think the one you just touched on is that all the records were destroyed in the wars. That's a big one. I think that one leads a lot of people to think that there's really no point in even trying to research their Polish ancestry. So getting people past that one, I think, is important. I think some of the other myths are, again, that one about they must have been from somewhere near the border with Germany, or the near the Austrian border. And similarly, we touched on the fact that the concept of identity. People think, well, if my grandmother said in the census that she was from Austria, I guess that means we're Austrian. And ethnically, no, there's a difference. So I think that's another one. But I think there are a lot of myths that just need to be dispelled with time and education and further research. But yeah, I think it's just sort of a process we all go through when we start discovering our families, and we have to make that investment to learn about the history and the culture, and then that really pays off in terms of our understanding and our eventual research progress.
That's really good to point out. I think and I've seen that so often where it says, "Yeah, oh, we were Austrian," like you said, or no, you weren't. Your name was what, Zielinski or Yurkevich, or to take a pick.
So another one of the myths that I think people are often prone to believing is that you'll hear these family stories that somebody was from Warsaw or from Poznań or from Krakow, and most of our ancestors came from small villages. And so you really have to identify the unique small village where they were from, because if you go looking for records in the big town, you're not going to find them. So in the case of my great grandmother, who was supposedly from Poznań, she was actually from this little village, which was like 50 miles east of Poznań. And same with her husband, my great grandfather. He was supposed to be from Warsaw, and he was from a little village 50 miles west of Warsaw. So location.
Yeah, I've seen that in different records too. Like even like the World War II registration records or World War One registration records here for the draft.
Mm-hmm.
I saw there it was like it mentioned the closest big city, and that was just kind of what they
Mm-hmm.
put. And really, like you said, actuality they're from a small town. I mean, and that was kind of
Yeah.
there's kind of these population moves in Poland as well. That like with industrialization, people move to the cities for work too. You see, and it is. I think that we have this idea of this stagnation a lot of times.
That was another misconception I definitely had. I thought once I found the ancestral village where each of my immigrant ancestors was from, I expected to find my family back for generations in that same town. And they were much more mobile than I anticipated. I did find for my ancestors from the Galicia area, they did stay put for like a couple hundred years. They were just from Kowachica for like 200 years. But other than that, everybody else was much more mobile.
I think too that there was this sort of sense, and I don't know if you come across as well, at least in the latter half of the 20th century, there was this real effort to assimilate, I think, particularly after the wars. And I sometimes wonder if people are hesitant to learn about their family history as it sort of runs counter to that. Have you experienced that as well, or am I just kind of like thinking out loud and that's incorrect?
No, I think I have too. In fact, I remember asking my grandparents all these questions about Polish culture and the family history, and they would just kind of shake their heads. I think they didn't understand why I was that interested. They were definitely proud of their Polish cultural traditions. We would celebrate Wigilia and Świątynka, and my grandfather would play Polish folk songs on the piano. But they were adamant about leaving the language behind. So they were terrified that my mother was going to grow up with an accent. So they would only speak English to her, and the language was lost in our family as a result of that. And I do think it was a sort of a strange dichotomy, because on the one hand they were proud and they went to a Polish church and all that stuff, but at the same time they were so adamant about assimilating, and they I think there was a little element of shame almost. They really wanted to be American and not have anyone judge them or think that they were, uneducated, or whatever. They really wanted, like, education was so important in my mother's family. They were adamant about her, speaking proper English and not having an accent, and speaking and using correct grammar, and being just well read, well educated. So I sort of feel like it was sort of a strange duality of assimilating, but also preserving the heritage.
I've seen it so much, and I mean there were stories too in my one side family that they spoke several languages, and as soon as the kids started to learn one, they would switch so that they wouldn't pick up anymore. But there was always this, and I don't know if that was part of kind of, if it was an external factor, like if it was pressure here in the US to kind of assimilate, or if it was, like you said, like this kind of shame, maybe things over there. I mean, I guess particularly after the war, there was, this sort of sense of anything that was even remotely Russian or what have you was kind of pilloried. But yeah, like you said, you had these, especially these ethnic enclaves, like upstate New York or Massachusetts, and here in Camden and Philadelphia, where the Polish sort of pride is on very big display, and people love to wear their Polish shirts, and they love their pierogi and everything. But then there's and I think what you touched on with the language is one that's really in particular. So like my wife, her parents are from Poland.
Mhm.
I'm fifth generation. So, and I speak more Polish than my grandparents did. And it's because I've kind of been really intent about doing that. And I keep muting because the next generation is screaming downstairs periodically. um, and it's so like my son, Alexander, he's growing up with Polish citizenship by default, and I want him to speak Polish, and I'm very intentional about passing that on. And because it's like for us, we kind of lost it, but now we've tried to reinstill it and make him as much of a Polish citizen of the world as an American citizen in the world. So I think you can go hand in hand. And I think a lot of people
Mhm.
are. I think that may not have been the case. I think it was always you really were one or the other, but you couldn't quite pull yourself away from it, because there was something about being Polish, that there was a particular magnetism there that you just couldn't let go of, because it was just so rich in its traditions and its food, and they're just everything you talked about, the Świątynka, the Wigilia, all that stuff.
It is interesting. That's the one big regret I have, is that my grandparents didn't speak Polish to my mother. They didn't speak Polish to my sister and me. I have had to try to regain some of that as you. I mean, I still can't speak it to save my life, unfortunately, but I've learned to read the vital records. Vital records are fortunately very formulaic. So, and there are some great translation aids out there for Polish genealogy. So I've learned to read vital records in Polish, Russian, and Latin. I'm still working on the German, and it's really a blessing to be able to read the historical records that document our ancestors' lives in the language that they were written in. So that's really
Yeah.
wonderful, though, that your son is growing up with the language. That's amazing. My second son studied Polish in college, and let's see, three of my four kids have made it a point to visit Poland, and my fourth son just hasn't gotten there yet, but he also plans to go at some point. And so we've definitely tried to share that culture with them, and they're all, I think, interested in their heritage. I wish they were maybe a little bit more interested in the genealogy part, but yeah, maybe they'll get there.
Because it can definitely inform it, and it was. I always grew up very proud to be Polish, kind of thing, like we talked about. But then when I got into the actual genealogy and the history, and it brought out something in me, and this real sense of pride and appreciation, and even so when I made the leap back to Poland, and went to these towns. Now, my family, when they had left, had totally lost contact with everyone there. We had no idea, no names, no nothing. And I was fascinated because we would go to these towns and we'd just start asking people. We'd ask the parish priest or the oldest person, the saltist, or whoever they came across, about like, oh, is there anyone with whatever surname we were happened to be searching for? And they'd be like, oh yeah, so and so, yeah, on the street. And you go knock on the door and talk to them. And I have such great relationships with these cousins that are so several times removed that were something like our great great grandparents were brothers or what have you. And to the point where I've gone independently and visited them, and we send Christmas cards to each other. And I've rediscovered this whole family that, even though it's distant, and that it's just a wonderful, it's an irreplaceable experience. It opened up a whole sense of myself as well doing that. I think that's like people like us, like, who are genealogists, who have had those experiences, want to share and want to tell people like, you can have this too. I guess.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. I've had exactly some of those experiences. The same thing, walking through one of my little ancestral villages, Barone Suave in Sohachep County, with the translator and knocking on doors. We knocked on the door of the Soltis, as you mentioned, and he pointed out, oh, yeah, yeah, there's a little Teresa Zajitska lives right over there. So we went and knocked on her door. And with the translator, we were able to figure out that her late husband was like my third cousin twice removed or something like that. But yeah, it was the same thing. I got this beautiful Christmas card from her. We stayed in touch until she passed. She had sent me this beautiful Christmas card with a Płatek in it for the first Christmas after we had come back from meeting her, and she welcomed me to the family in this card. It was just so touching and incredible. And yeah, like you, I've had the good fortune to connect with a number of different cousins from different ancestral lines all throughout Poland. It's just such a neat experience. You sort of feel like your ancestors up in heaven are looking down and smiling because the family is reunited again.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And then they pull out the pictures and you see the similarities. I remember it was like a picture my cousin pulled out, and I was like, oh my god, that's my mother. and um and it's just, I don't know, there's and with that too, there were so many stories. Like, there were I had one great great grandmother who was illegitimate, and my other great 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 grandfather, Matalevich, actually, he was as well. And that was kind of like a wow, that stuff happened then too.
Yeah.
And and it just, I don't know, I think it reaffirms kind of this this knowledge that, yeah, people are people, and no matter what the time and place is. I mean, that's why I found the value. I mean, we've talked a lot about this, but I mean, in terms of like the value of genealogy, that's how I always saw it as well.
I completely agree. I feel like the perspective it gives you on your family, and just also on the fact that people are people throughout history. Somebody was just asking me yesterday why I thought families stayed together sometimes, why they kept in touch sometimes, but they didn't other times. And I really feel like it kind of goes back to families are families. And there are some people within your family that you're going to be closer with than others. And those are probably the relationships that persisted. And then sometimes maybe people drifted just because of who they were. It's just such an amazing journey of discovery to do genealogy.
So, are there any particular projects or associations or things that you're working on, or kind of would like to let our audience know as we kind of come to the end of our discussion here?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you asked. Again, as affiliated with the Polish Genealogical Society of New York State, one of our projects is to try to make accessible historical records that help people with their genealogy. So, if any of your listeners have ancestors in New York State, especially in Western New York, we have a database of unique indexed church records, and we have a project where we collect those little obrazki, those little funerary prayer cards, and we index those. We have and newspapers. We have just completed a big digitization project. This was a huge undertaking for an organization of our size. It cost us, I think, over $36,000 to digitize a number of issues of the Polish newspaper, the Dziennik dla Wszystkich, Everybody's Daily, and it was Buffalo's Polish newspaper from 1911 to 1957. And previously, the Library of Congress had microfilmed a bunch of issues, but in many cases, especially during the important World War II years, the issues that were digitized were national issues, which did not contain any of the local news specific to Western New York and none of the obituaries, birth, marriage, and death announcements, anything like that. So we had actually partnered with the Polish Museum of America in Chicago, which had the paper copies that had never been microfilmed or digitized, and we had those professionally digitized, and then the images were processed to make them OCR, searchable optical character recognition, and they're now uploaded and available at the New York State Historic Newspapers website, where they're freely accessible. So we actually have a number of newspapers from Buffalo's Polish community that we have digitized, and they're all available at New York State Historic Newspapers. So it's a great way to jump in. Newspaper research in particular, I find fascinating because it really puts some flesh on those bare bones of names and dates in the family tree. You learn more about your family as people. You see what they were interested in, what sports teams they were on, and in those days before Facebook, the newspapers really contained a lot of personal information. So we're really trying to facilitate that. And again, also our church records database is if you've got Buffalo ancestors, it's really invaluable because these records are not available on Ancestry or Family Search or anywhere else. So go check out our databases, and if you have roots in Western New York, I definitely would encourage you to join our society. But there's a number of different Polish genealogical societies. So depending on where your ancestors lived, there's Polish Genealogical Society of America. There's one in Michigan, one in Minnesota. One in Greater Cleveland. There used to be one in California, but they closed up shop. I'm trying to think. I probably missed one or two, but yeah. So definitely check out your local Polish genealogical societies, or there might be one again where your ancestors settled, and they usually have some unique databases and resources that can help you further your research.
Especially too the storehouses of all this information were these Polish churches, many of whom are kind of being merged or closed here and there, and so sometimes it can be a little difficult to track down that stuff. So if there's a Polish genealogical society, like you said that you mentioned, that's a great way to storehouse some of this stuff so it doesn't get lost.
If somebody's just starting out, I would encourage them to talk to a genealogical society or a Facebook group and get help, from people like me, or just message me through my blog. I answer questions like that all the time. So
Hopefully you enjoyed our interview with Julie Szczepankiewicz. If you'd like to learn more about Polish genealogy or genealogy in general, please visit our social media pages this month for links and information on how to start your own family history journey. We will also make sure to post links to Julie's blog, which contains a treasure trove of information. As always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our show on your favorite podcast medium, as well as our Facebook and Instagram pages. You can also, of course, come visit us every Sunday at 10 a.m. at our home in Camden, New Jersey, as thousands have for over a century. Until next month, soltej sam pierogi and go sit with a saint. Dziękujemy, thank you, and do usłyszenia.